somehow they hook people in this thing that neutrality is good. And there is nothing inherently good about neutrality if you think about it. And I would argue whether Helvetica is neutral or not.
What is up, typography enthusiasts? Welcome to today's first Pimp My Type talk. I have José Scaglione as a guest. José is founder of the well-renowned or high-renowned foundry TypeTogether, together with Veronica Burian, and they worked for major brands like Google or Apple and designed serif typefaces for on-screen display. And this is also a reason why I invited José. I wanted to chat with him about what is it with the predominance of sans-serif typefaces for screen display? Why are there always sans-serif typefaces? We discovered that this might be a legacy issue. We also talk about legibility and readability on screen. He's sharing some tips also if you want to start and dive into this subject. What I really like about José is his calming style. He really calms you down and he's so grounded, but his advice is very profound and precise. Oh, that rhymes. José also shares how they as a foundry felt when they switched from static design to variable fonts, and if we really need that design space. I also decided to release this episode as a podcast on all the common podcast platforms. You can download it because there's not so much visual about it, or not at all. It's just us talking in this episode. So if you're already listening to it on podcast, welcome. It is though helpful if you want to see the typefaces we are describing. I all summarize them with some images in the blog post, which you can find under pimpmytype.com/talk01, where you also can download this episode in an audio format only if you prefer. So without further ado, I'm very excited to talk with José Scaglione. Welcome, José Scaglione. I'm so honored to have you as my first guest on Pimp My Type here on the YouTube channel. And if you don't know José, shame on you, because he's pretty well known in the typography and type design scene. He's type designer, lecturer, and co-author, but most important, he's the co-founder of TypeTogether, a foundry that's near and dear to my heart since I was in design school. So welcome, José. How are you?
Hi, Oliver. I'm so excited to be here. A big fan of the podcast and the YouTube channel. So yes, absolutely.
Maybe the podcast is still to come.
We will have a pleasant conversation, and I hope I will not say anything stupid and I will have to regret afterwards.
I'll edit everything out, so don't worry about that. So for everybody who does not know TypeTogether, maybe I have to summarize a bit, because it's one of these very influential foundries to me personally. And most people might be familiar with TypeTogether from Bree, or maybe also from Adelle, which are very popular typefaces by yours. But Bree is, I guess, the most popular one. It's also in your logo type. And I think you're kind of victim of your own success. It always looks like, come on, didn't they come up with a proper logo type? This is just Bree. Because it got so popular, but they made this typeface. Yeah.
The story is just the other way around. We made the logo first, and a lot of people kept asking us what typeface that was. So then we decided to convert it into a proper family. But the logo, Veronica, she drew the original one when we started back in 2005. And this version is a bit bolder. It's actually, you cannot make this version with the typeface, but yes, it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. But because you just recognize it from the letter shapes, from the closed loop on the Y and the G, which is very characteristic, and kind of because it's so popular, you can't use it anymore, to me. But a friend of mine, I also have a review on the channel about this, who used the typeface on his blog. I recommended using the open type alternative characters for the Z and for the G and for the Y. So it doesn't look that similar to other sites that are using it, and it still conveys this round, soft spirit. So it's great that you always offered these options and these open type features from the early days on, and I really appreciate that.
Yes. Well, let's say the smart font formats gave us the possibility of just expand our creativity and to make font families more useful or more versatile, if you wish. Yeah, sure. So for a starting question, what would you say, Jose, is your favorite typographic mistake? What you see all the time? Well, let's say the favorite, using tabular numbers for business cards. That is a pretty interesting one. Why wouldn't you use them? Because you end up with a big gap between your 1 and your 0, and that looks, it doesn't look that well. So whenever someone hands you a business card, the first thing you need to look is how the numbers are typeset. Yeah, that's a good one. I always, yeah, it's something that drives me crazy as well, when tabular figures are not used where they should be and where line vice versa,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, vice versa, definitely, yeah. So that's the, let's say, yeah, that's something that we typographers suffer all the time, but we gotta get a thick skin after being bitten by the typography bug. All right, so when I discovered this subject of typography 15, 16 years ago, I was bitten by this typographic bug, and I discovered how much things can improve or be better when you just focus on this stuff. To you as a graphic designer as well, and also as a type designer, why do you think it's beneficial to learn about typography? Right, well, if you think about it, Oliver, as graphic designers, what we try to make the communication more efficient, not only for it to look beautiful, but also to be effective. And most of these things that we will need to communicate will require written language. And nowadays, written language is, let's say, a good portion of the times, or 95% of the times, it will be created with mechanized writing, that is typography. So it is like knowing how to use a hammer for a carpenter. It's really one of the most basic tools that graphic designers and communicators use every day. And using it right makes a whole lot of difference. It is, I mean, the silly example that we were discussing, or the numbers in a business card, when you are talking about a magazine, imagine that mistake multiplied 1,000 times, right? Yeah. And but I have the feeling that, yes, cultivating this kind of typographic sensitivity to understand how the shapes work, and the role of typography in each piece of communication is utterly important for graphic designers. And nowadays, when I say graphic designers, I'm talking about really the broader range of type users, because a web designer and a digital designer is also a graphic designer. Yeah. So you always have some text. You can't get rid of that. And if you have some text, typographic skills will help, of course. Yeah. Yes. And sorry, and just to wrap up, the idea also, the way that text interacts with everything else in a page. It needs to communicate not only with the reader, but with the rest of the contents that you have around the text itself. Yeah, sure. What would you say? So when it comes to typography for digital purposes, you have a lot of experience in that. You also told me before that you made, so to the people who don't know about that, because you did for the e-readers of Apple and for Google Play, you did the typefaces there back then, almost 10 years ago, when this wasn't that, when displays weren't that high resolution and things also had to work in a broader environment, I guess. But when it comes to typography for user interfaces, and I'm talking about functional text here, which would be, let's say, a navigational element or on a tab bar, or maybe just a short notification or something. So text that's small but should be very legible, basically. Everybody seems to use sans-serif. Why do you think is that? What's the reason behind that this is the major style?
Well, I think that there is a legacy issue here that we're dealing with. For those who are younger designers, they might not have lived the 90s, in which the pixel sizes were like this big. And there was no such thing as anti-aliasing. So let's say when you had to select a typeface, you really were limited to not only Georgia and Verdana, but also to serifs that didn't look well because of the low resolution or the limitations, let's say, that screens had to reproduce these details. Of course, a lot of water has gone under the bridge since then, and now we have retina screens that are much better, and they can reproduce these details very well. Nevertheless, I think there is this thing that continues about using mostly sans-serifs. Regardless of the resolution, there is something that is true. One needs to look for typefaces, serif or sans-serif, that will actually look good. When you're talking about screens and small size for type, really having very narrow letters or very close terminals, things like that, that doesn't contribute towards legibility. But that is true both on screen and on paper as well. So the principles for legibility really are very similar in both mediums.
Yeah. So it's not really depending on, is it a serif or is it a sans-serif? The thing what I observed is that, of course, if you have more even strokes and you have more or little contrast in the shapes, and you have open counters and apertures and this stuff, so that it's easier, and a larger X height, that it's easier to read, no matter what kind of decoration adding the serifs on there is.
Right. I agree with you. Basically, we are looking for open counters, large X height, low contrast, rather sturdy shapes. And that is true for small sizes everywhere. So if you want to, let's pretend that dictionaries, like printed dictionaries, are still a thing that we will continue to design, which is a big question mark. You need to make sure these letters are very small, because you don't have what we call continuous reading in a dictionary. Basically, you need to navigate the pages until you find your entry, and you read only a few lines of text. So there is no reader's fatigue, right? Now, in small sizes for dictionaries, you wish to have the same kind of features: open shapes, open counters, to avoid closing terminals or shapes that can confuse with each other. You want to have low contrast, and generally shapes that are sturdy, that can withstand the problems, the limitations of small size reproduction.
Yeah, so interesting, because you say basically there's not continuous reading. That's a good point, because in a user interface, in an app design or something, except now for let's say an e-reader, okay, let's leave that aside, yeah. But for an app design where you have small informational fragments, you don't really read a lot, but you have to be clear on what the message and the thing behind that is. So what's interesting to me is that there is one particular kind of sensor which seems to be super popular among these user interface styles. It's not like, which is basically these neo-grotesque, Helvetica-like sans-serifs, like San Francisco or Roboto or Inter, which are more or less the same or very similar. And why do you think is this kind of design so popular?
I mean, popularity of the neo-grotesque sans-serif has come and gone through the years, and it will go away and it will come again for sure. A lot of these, let's say, especially the families that were created a long time ago and they became classics, we need to understand that why they became classics. They are good, of course, but they were there at the time where digital typography didn't exist and there were not as many options. So yes, their popularity, of course, continued, and in some cases, Helvetica is probably the most renowned one. They managed to sell themselves as a neutral typefaces, and somehow they hook people in this thing that neutrality is good. And there is nothing inherently good about neutrality if you think about it. And I would argue whether Helvetica is neutral or not, right?
Yeah.
But I think there is something there about these kind of very clean shapes. They are a bit more inexpressive, if you wish, and that for certain things, in some designs, they might be more appropriate, let's say. However, I would be at least not worried, but let's say I will be careful about what I was mentioning before, that the shapes in these neo-grotesque styles, they tend to close on each other's themselves too much, and then you have the uppercase S looking like an 8 or things like that, or the usual problem with the I, the L, and the number 1,
yeah,
things like that. That when you go on screen and when you need clarity of information, it might become a problem.
Yeah, yeah. So this is, yeah, it's more or less, as you say, the image of being neutral or something, that more or less, because it was so ubiquitous, maybe because it is so ubiquitous. Helvetica is so ubiquitous that people perceive it as no design, which basically is not true, because everything is designed in a certain way. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So why do you think, when I'm looking at Portada, which was one of the typefaces you released in 2016, where you claimed, okay, this now is a typeface where it's a serif typeface, which is really aimed towards screen design and also user interfaces. It comes with a lot of icons, 250 or something like this, which I find as a designer very helpful, because you have something that's in the same design language. Iconography and letters always are combined in a way, and you don't have to figure out if this fits together, because it simply does. And so still, it's very unusual to see an app with a serif typeface.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Why do you think is that?
Well, I think it requires probably for designers to move away from their comfort zone. And that takes a lot of effort and work and time. I mean, it is easier to repeat what is safe and what is proven to work, and that what is easier to sell to customers. However, looking for new solutions can be very rewarding, and it is a good idea from the point of view of mental processing, right? I would say that the thing is to understand what is the right kind of serif typeface for user interface. And then we are going to be very technical about this, because it's not only the details that we already discussed, but let's say, remember that when you print something, you're putting ink on paper, black ink on paper, let's say.
Yeah.
When the ink hits the paper, it moves away. So it creates an ink splash. In the old days, this was called ink squash, because when you pressed the actual letter form in the paper, it would squash the ink away from borders, right?
Yeah.
How much does the ink spreads out? It depends on the porosity of the paper, the flatness of the paper, the ink, the press pressure, a lot of things. And you will say, okay, so really printing something is really complex, but having something on screen is complex on a different level. To begin with, you do not know what kind of screen the user has.
Sure.
And they are not all the same. And also, right now, you don't have ink invading the paper, but you have light invading the shape. So from my point of view, one of the first things that needs to be addressed is what kind of typographic color the designer is looking for. I am a big fan myself of really black letters, right? I like them on paper, I like them on screen. So having the right weight is important. And now probably something that we should discuss in a few minutes, but the variable fonts, they allow us to tweak the actual stroke width to a certain level of finesse. But also remember that the light will invade the black area. So you need to work the opposite way. And back in the day, you would choose a lighter font so the ink will spread and you get the appropriate color. Right now, you need to choose a darker font that will withstand how the light invades the shape itself.
Yeah.
And at the same time, in my opinion, and this is just out of let's say the experience we got working with especially with the Google Literata project, that was a project for an e-reader. After a lot of tests, what we found out is that a rather generous letter spacing in text sizes is a big benefit for on-screen rendering.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for elaborating on that issue. This is also the reason why Times New Roman works so bad on screens. It was made for print, for paper Times, for the Times basically. So, and it's too sharp, too delicate. So yeah, that's the issue what I have with it when I see it on screens. And when you know what it was intended for, it makes perfect sense. And it always comes back to what do you want to do with your typeface, or for what kind of application do you want to use it. So thanks for bringing that up. And regarding variable fonts and also the Literata project, this is very interesting as well, because what I think is one of the greatest features that make my heart shine all the time from variable fonts is the optical sizing. It makes me super excited. back then we had certain styles, text sizes, display sizes, maybe title sizes, and a type designer had to produce every style individually. And now it kind of is like when it was in metal time, you could adjust the, basically the sturdiness of the strokes, the spacing, and everything, all these tiny details, the contrast, when you set a typeface in different sizes, because it was the physical representation of a certain size. Now with digital text, even in photo lettering, it's one shape reproduced across multiple sizes. Who cares, whatever. And now with optical sizes, this is coming back at a much finer and better level, which really excites me, which also gives us designers the possibility to adjust the weights and the sizes to these specific situations. And I think for you as a type designer or as a company, it also must have been challenging to kind of leave this world where it was more or less a finished size to a more fluid approach, where like in web design or app design, where we had to switch from one size to responsive web design, where we had to make our designs more fluid. Maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Yes, I mean, one of the problems is up to which extent you're willing to lose control on your design, which, as you mentioned, yes, in web development is something that you had to learn to do very early on, because you have different sizes of screens, right? I think that is something that we also had to learn how to do. For us, I think we are a bit of control freaks. So for me, at least, it was a bit of a hard work. I mean, when you look at our type family, Adelle Sans, which has 7 weights, and the original one, we engineered each one of those weights and tweaking details in each one of those. And probably goes to extent that, yeah, you could still do it in variable fonts, but it would be a bit of a hindrance to have 7 masters on our font.
Sure.
So what we try to do is try to incorporate specific designs for certain letters that will not work as well when you move the slider. Most of the times happens with the letters with 3 horizontal strokes, like S, E, lowercase a, and so on. The contrast starts to be a bit muddy, a bit lost. So we try to focus there, but we understand the importance of the variable font format, not only because of responsive design, but also in terms of weight, file size. For developers, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it offers you a lot of design space now as a designer, but also the question there is, do I need this design space? I ran into let's say a luxury problem, having updated the fonts on pimpmytype.com to Piazzolla from Typographica, where they have this optical size, because I'm so excited about to use it. And the problem is, I think I'll have to subset it someday. I'm not into this at all. I have to figure out how it does. Right now, it's 250 kilobytes in a WAV2 compression, which is rather large. And but I also need an italic. The problem here now is when the Roman has optical sizing, I can't just use the italic, because then it would look off in combination with it, because one has optical sizing, the other has not. So that's a bit of a bummer, because now I have to load 500 kilobytes of font size.
That's right. That's right.
But who
that
cares?
Is the problem.
People download 1 megabyte of photos. I'll download 0.5 megabyte of fonts. You have to live with that. And yeah, I'll just go with that for now. But eventually, I'm going to have to figure out maybe to subset it, remove characters which I don't need, or language support which I don't need for my case here. But basically, it gives us a lot of design space, and always the question, do we really need so many different tweaks and styles, since we want to achieve a more or less harmonious, or let's say a repetitive system of visual language, where if something's different, it should make sense, and if something's not different, it should be the same, basically.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I kind of agree with you. I mean, it is nice to have a super large family in terms of you choosing what you want to use, but you won't use it all. So where do you stop?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, yes, you have I don't know, we have Belarius, one of the latest family with this shapeshifter that goes from sans to serif, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we ended up with 90 styles, that is 90.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And when you're talking about a website, maybe you will use 6.
Yeah.
Right. So that is it really worth it to load everything, or is just better to limit yourself? Regarding character set, that is a different ballgame probably, because in a globalized world, yes, you might think that you will use only German or English or Spanish now, but then you need to publish an article that has a Vietnamese name on it, and then you're screwed because you have one letter sticking out of the page for you. So in terms of language support, I don't know, it is a bit of a compromise that one would need to make there, right?
Yeah, sure, it definitely is. I agree on that. Sure. Belarius is a great topic, because I wanted to come back a bit about the serif typefaces and also using in user interfaces. I think Belarius is a great example for making something that's, let's say, my personal opinion is that Slab serif typefaces are the upcoming stars of user interface design. This is just my opinion, because there are so many reasons for that. They are more interesting, or let's say they give us a different vibe than the sans-serif we all have. The strokes are still that contrasting, depending on the slab serif, but the slab serif basically has very contrasting strokes, so you won't have an issue with that. Maybe in the very tiny sizes of 10, 12 points, speaking in iPhone points, you might choose then the sans-serif for the tab bar below. But it's still the same, let's say, skeleton visual shape, and then you could perfectly use it in a larger size, the more expressive heading style. So Belarius gives you this vast design space and also comes with a rather large X height. I just love that, because it gives you the option to play around and, as you said, try something new and not always follow the conventions. What was the intention with Belarius? Was this something you wanted to achieve there, or was it more some kind of a display typeface using for magazines? Because I see you have a lot of editorial focus in your font catalog, or continuous reading, as you said, but not so much then on user interface. Or is this a benefit we can use there as well?
Right. I mean, I think our editorial focus at some point shifted to, I mean, it's not that we stopped doing that, we still do that, but we have a bunch of families that are more like we call them multiple purpose families. Everything that we design nowadays is meant to be both for screen and print, everything. Belarius in particular is part of a trilogy of typefaces. The first, that they are meant to work together in an eclectic manner. The first one is called Catalpa. There is a titling typeface that has only very heavy weights and very light weights, right? It's a simple type family, something that we like it a lot. It has a lot of punch and a lot of personality. Belarius was meant to be this typeface that you would use as the color typeface for everything. So it's something that could work on decks, it could work on smaller type, it could work on navigation, it could work on a poster if you want it larger. If you look at it, it doesn't have a huge range of weights in terms of typographic color, but it makes up for that with the capability of extending the serifs, more or less. because you have different widths.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference, I think.
Yeah.
And that is part, and that goes with the third typeface, which we will be publishing later this year. It's called Aneto, and it's more of an old style. And the idea is that you can mix and match these three in a very eclectic way.
Oh, cool. So it's interesting that you think of it as a more or less as a library of fonts that you can then use and mix, because as I heard, to me personally, it's always the nicest part of a project, mixing typefaces. But a lot of designers struggle with that. So if you can provide something where it's a good combination, I think it's very helpful to a lot of people which are newcomers to typography and still want to achieve a good result and use that. Maybe another question regarding sans-serif typefaces. What do you think, or not mostly sans-serif typefaces, when we talk about digital typography, we also always have to talk about the issue of accessibility, which is then something people with vision impairments, let's say the thing isn't always just, okay, I can see and I can't see. The space in between is the tricky one. What to do about that? Most accessibility sites recommend you using sans-serif or open dyslexic or whatever, some kind of specially treated typefaces, because they should provide an advantage when it comes to certain kind of mental or visual impairments. So what's your opinion on that? Because sans-serif always seems to be the suggestion number one. And to me as a designer, I'm always feeling like, please don't take the serifs away from me, because we have or should make things accessible. I don't want to argue about that, but what's your take on that? Because the rules are very fuzzy, of course, because it's a visual medium. You can't say this is the right way to do it and this is the wrong way to do it.
Right. I mean, this is probably part of a discussion that, there are books written about this. And
Sure, yeah.
I would like to probably separate the visual hindrances or optical engine problems from the dyslexic the bigger dyslexic issues, which are...
Then let's stick to the visuals. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Right. I think this should be handled separately.
Yeah.
Mainly because there are many things happening in dyslexia that we cannot fix with time.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. From the visual point of view, I would argue that more important than whether it is sans or it is serif, it is the type size and the contrast. And I'm not talking about typographic contrast here. I'm talking about figure and background contrast. You need good contrast and good size if you want it to be legible. And again, the rule of thumb for anything to read well, you need large X height and features that, in typography, there is a very fine line that we need to walk, where the design has to look consistent, but then shapes, they need to be clearly different from each other. Going back to the example of the uppercase I and the L, if you have a difference in size, if you add the serif, if you add an outstroke to the L, then you get something that is more recognizable. And that is true for other things as well. I personally, when it comes to legibility for for continuous readings, that is for proper typesetting in a book or several paragraphs or an article that goes online, I prefer to have typefaces that they are not so modular in terms of letter width.
Mm-hmm.
So because of the nature of screen, a lot of the designs, they are very stiff. When you look at the width of the O, the A, the E, they are very similar. They all they take the same amount of space. Yeah. And the stress, the modulation is very vertical. So you end up with this lines repeating, and the counters are becoming very, very similar. When you look at, let's say, BDPQ, you have 4 ovals that are like this. When you go to old style designs and you start slanting that counter a little bit, then you end up with the shapes being rotated. So they are no longer so similar, or at least the shapes that they produce, the black they produce, it is not as similar. So having some variety in letter width and having a bit of slant in the stress in terms of continuous reading, to me, it is still an advantage. And to me, for proper paragraph reading, serif typefaces are still my number one choice, let's say.
Yeah, maybe also because the shapes or the letter shapes are more distinct, because the serifs all make it. You won't have this issue with IL number 1 or uppercase I, lowercase l number 1, where it's the same shape like in Gill Sans, the popular example, a long line basically without any other hints what this could mean. You won't have that in a serif typeface and a slab serif, of course. So to create a more distinct word shape or something, it will definitely be beneficial. Okay, yeah, so what would be, just to kind of wrap this up, what would be a suggestion to you for web developers and user interface designers and web designers to try out serif typefaces and leave the path of Inter, Roboto, San Francisco Pro, and all the other typefaces, we Open Sans, of course, as well, we see all the time, which are, not bad, as we already said, but they are ubiquitous and they always convey one kind of mood. Maybe Open Sans not so much, but one kind of theme or atmosphere. What would you say to encourage people to use a different kind of typeface?
Right. I mean, probably there are a few pieces of advice that could be mentioned. One of those, and this I will mention this first because it's probably not something that everyone knows, and for both web developers or digital designers or graphic designers, the type foundries are there to provide a service to you. So whenever you are in doubt, you need to send an email to your friend typographer or to any random type foundry, and I'm sure they will be more than happy to reply to your questions, because that's what we do. Now, if you are going to start trying some serif typefaces for your design, whether it is in the navigation elements or in the actual contents that you're providing, my advice is to try to start with the sturdy type designs that do not feel delicate. The serifs are not too thin or too feeble, that there is some consistency to the shapes, that they will withstand this action of the light that we were discussing before. Then try to combine serif and sans in different roles, and to assign them very specific roles to each of those. If you have a nice typesetting for the article in a sans-serif, well, try making titles in a serif and see how you like it. And try to find type families that work together from speaking the same language in terms of how organic they look. If they look machine-made or handmade. Let's say when you look at the Dawn, it is a serif typeface, but it looks pretty much machine-made because it's very flat and stuff.
Like Belarius.
Like Belarius, it's very machine done, right? If you look at the Garamond, it is the whole opposite. If you were to work with Belarius or a very stiff typeface, then you would expect to have a sans-serif that also speaks the same language in terms of letter width, vertical stress, and so on. So I wouldn't go with a humanist sans, right? So try to think about these elements to not being part of the same or not being too similar, but to speak the same graphic language. And I would say that is likely to produce a good outcome.
Yeah, definitely. If you want this this is a great advice, thinking about the role which typeface should cover, and to make things more or less similar, if you want to combine them very closely, or to make them super contrasting, so you don't have the issue with that. For a display typeface, for example, where you just can go crazy. Basically, use whatever you like and then combine it with something else.
Absolutely.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Jose. Before we close, rapid round of questions. 3 things you can just answer right away what's on your mind, and elaborate if you want to. First one, free fonts or paid fonts?
Both of them.
Cool.
I mean, we should use everything that is available to us. I wouldn't, unless we have a limit in the budget right from the start, I wouldn't limit myself in the search.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, M dash or N dash?
Oh, bloody hell. You're asking tough questions now. I think it would depend on the context. For book design, I like M dash. And also, but you need to consider the grammatical rules or the orthographic rules from each place. There are in some countries there are more decided about this that in other countries. For book design, I would say M dash is nice, and for magazine design, N dash.
Great.
If I had my way.
Toughest one at the end, Comic Sans or Helvetica?
Come on, those are for different things. I have used them both, and very successfully. Even Comic Sans, when you put it on top of a cartoon, it looks fantastic. I have nothing against it.
Crazy. Okay, awesome. So thanks a lot, Jose. Had a blast, learned a lot, and where can people find out more about you and the things you provide?
Well, you can log on to our website, that is type-together.com, or just search for TypeTogether online and you will surely find us. We do have fonts, but also we have a bunch of contents for people looking for inspiration about great designers using fonts, and even some articles about choosing typefaces, combining typefaces, and things like that that are usually useful, even about font licensing. So make sure that you check not only the font library, but also the blog. And if anything, as a reminder, remember to just contact type foundries that is always likely to produce a good outcome.
Thank you, Jose, for joining, for being my first guest. What a great reminder that foundries are our friends. They are there to be contacted. I really appreciate this reminder. What did you think about this first episode? Find all the links and give me your feedback on pimpmytype.com/talk01. You can write it in the comments there or send me an email. I really read and reply to them all. And I really appreciate it if you take the time to tell me your question, something that bugs you, something that interests you, or maybe somebody I should invite to talk to. Until then, I wish you joyful moments with beautiful letters and nice typography, and see you in the next one. Bye.